Welcome to the Case of the Chalk-Stained Ledger, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, the Sussex Apocrypha, playing in the year 1906, though my published accounts of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes concluded years ago. A recent discovery compels me to take up my pen once more. I have, after considerable effort, deciphered a coded ledger from his retirement in Sussex, a collection of cases he deemed too personal or too strange for the public eye. These accounts reveal a more contemplative Holmes, grappling with the encroaching modern world from his quiet seaside retreat. Our chronicle begins with an affair that unfolded amidst the chalk quarries of the South Downs, an entry I have titled The Case of the Chalk-Stained Ledger. Chapter 1. My friend's retirement to the Sussex Downs had, I confess, filled me with a certain apprehension. To imagine that restless, incandescent mind occupied with nothing more than beekeeping seemed a cruel jest of fate. Yet on that particular Tuesday morning, a profound peace had settled over our small cottage, a gentle breeze, carrying the tang of salt and the scent of wild thyme, drifted through the open study window, causing the pages of the morning paper to rustle softly. From the garden came the contented, low hum of Holmes's prize-winning apiary. He was hunched over a volume on ancient Cornish dialects, a thin stream of smoke rising from his neglected pipe, the very picture of scholarly contentment. The quiet was broken by a soft but urgent knock on the study door. It was our housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, who had followed Holmes from Baker Street into this bucolic exile. She carried the Morning Post upon a silver tray, but I noted at once that her usual placid efficiency was marred by a distinct unease. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly, causing the porcelain to emit a faint, rattling clatter. Holmes's head snapped up, his piercing grey eyes instantly registering the subtle discord in Mrs. Hudson's demeanour. "Well, Mrs. Hudson, your hands betray you. The post is clearly not your only errand. What ill wind blows through our village this fine morning?" Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "It's a terrible business, Mr. Holmes. A terrible, sad business," Martha Hudson replied. She set the tray down upon a side table with a soft thud, her movements stiff. Her voice, usually so steady, had acquired a hushed, sombre tone, barely rising above a whisper. "It's Mr. Croft. Silas Croft, the foreman up at the Marsh quarry. They found him this morning, at the bottom of the north face, buried. The cliffside gave way, they're saying." "A landslide," Martha Hudson replied. Holmes gave a slight shrug, his interest already beginning to wane. He tapped the ash from his pipe into a small dish with a dismissive clink and gestured towards the letters. "A tragic industrial accident, to be sure, but hardly a matter that requires my intervention. The local constabulary are perfectly capable of overseeing such an unfortunate affair," declared Sherlock Holmes. Mrs. Hudson clasped her hands together, a gesture of earnest appeal that I knew well. The fabric of her apron rustled as she took a step closer to his desk. "Ordinarily, sir, yes. But it's what my cousin, who keeps house for the quarry's owner, has been telling me for weeks. Mr. Croft, he wasn't himself. He was a man of routine, precise as a clockmaker, but for the past month he'd been seen pacing at all hours, his face pale with worry. He'd lost his appetite, started at sudden noises. He was a man living in mortal fear, Mr. Holmes." "And not of any landslide," remarked Martha Hudson. It was this final detail that arrested Holmes's attention. He leaned forward, the forgotten book on Cornish dialects sliding from his lap to the floor with a soft thud. His lethargy vanished as if a switch had been thrown. The hawk was awake once more. He fixed Mrs. Hudson with a gaze of such intensity that she took an involuntary step back, her breath catching audibly in her throat. "Fear, you say? A meticulous man, a creature of habit, suddenly consumed by anxiety for a full month before his demise? You see, Mrs. Hudson, that is the point of true interest," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He paused, his voice dropping from sharp inquiry to a low, conspiratorial tone. "A landslide is an act of God, sudden and unforgiving. It does not send a calling card 4 weeks in advance. A man, however, does. A guilty conscience, a threat, a looming danger one sees approaching. These things cast a long shadow, observed Sherlock Holmes. He rose from his chair in a single, fluid motion, the legs scraping sharply against the floorboards. A new energy crackled about him. The quiet scholar was gone, and in his place stood the hunter. He began to pace the small room, his footsteps a restless rhythmic creak on the old wood. An anxious foreman, and a convenient collapse of chalk. There is a discordant note in that composition. You have done well to bring this to me, Mrs. Hudson. Exceedingly well, replied Sherlock Holmes. He stopped before me, his eyes alight with the fire of a new problem. The bees, the books, the quiet Sussex life were all forgotten. The game, as he was so fond of saying, was afoot. Though our journey from Lewes lasted but a brief while, it seemed we had crossed into a realm wholly apart from the one we'd left behind. The gentle green of the Sussex Downs gave way with startling abruptness to a great white wound gashed into the earth, a stark and unnatural vista. As we drew closer, the very air grew thick, tasting of fine dust and a peculiar, dry coolness that emanated from the quarry's depths. The sharp crunch of our boots on the chalk-strewn track was the sole sound to disturb the profound, almost deafening, quiet of the place. A stout, red-faced man in an inspector's uniform awaited us at the lip of the pit. He introduced himself as Inspector Davies of the local constabulary, his voice a booming counterpoint to the thin, whispering wind that swept across the vast excavation. Mr. Holmes, an honour. Though I confess I am surprised to see a man of your reputation concerning himself with such a clear-cut tragedy. A simple, unfortunate landslide. Local police inspector replied, Tragedy is rarely simple, Inspector, and nature is often blamed for the misdeeds of men. I should like to see the spot, if I may, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The inspector let out a weary sigh, his shoulders slumping in a gesture of indulgence. He led us down a precarious path cut into the pit itself. The sheer walls of chalk rose on all sides, dwarfing us, their surfaces so blindingly white under the pale sun that one had to squint. Below, a mound of rubble and larger chalk blocks was heaped against the cliff face. A few scattered tools, a shovel, a pickaxe, lay half buried nearby, marking the site where the unfortunate foreman, Mr. Croft, had met his end. Davies gestured with a thick, chalk-dusted finger towards the pile. There. He was working at the base when the face gave way, buried in an instant. We had to dig for an hour to recover him. A terrible business. Local police inspector answered. While the inspector spoke, Holmes had already dropped to one knee, heedless of the white dust that immediately coated his dark trousers. His keen eyes were not fixed on the main pile of debris, but instead swept over the scene at its edges. He produced his pocket lens, the familiar click of its casing sharp in the silence. He began to examine the ground at the periphery of the rockfall, his movements quick and precise as a hunting bird. You say the entire face gave way, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Well, Mr. Holmes, a goodly portion of it, to be sure, more than sufficient to accomplish the grim task, as is plain to see, local police inspector said. Holmes rose to his feet, the crunch of chalk under his boots echoing slightly. He turned his gaze upwards, shielding his eyes with one hand against the oppressive glare reflecting from the cliff. He stared intently at the rock face, his focus absolute. I followed his line of sight, but my own eyes, unaccustomed to the brilliant white, could discern nothing more than a sheer vertical wall, brutally scarred by the recent collapse. Curious, very curious indeed, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He offered no further explanation. After a few more moments of silent contemplation, he thanked the inspector for his time. Davies, clearly relieved to be rid of us, trudged back up the path, his heavy footsteps growing faint in the immense, quiet space. Once the inspector was out of earshot, Holmes turned to me, his eyes alight with that familiar fire of discovery that I knew so well. Did you observe it, Dr. Reed? The flaw in the inspector's simple tragedy, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I confess, Holmes, I saw only a pile of rock and a tragically unstable cliff. Dr. Alistair Reed replied, Look again at the debris. A true landslide, a broad failing of the rock, would create a wide, fan-shaped cascade. This, however, is concentrated. The bulk of the rock fell in a remarkably straight line. Now look up there, observed Sherlock Holmes. He raised his arm, his finger aimed towards the source of the fall. Now that he had directed my attention, my eyes adjusted and I could finally discern what his sharper gaze had perceived at once. High above the clean break of the collapse, a series of faint, dark lines radiated into the white chalk, fissures that seemed too regular, too structured to be entirely natural, like fine cracks spreading across a porcelain plate. Those are not the marks of natural stress, Reed. They hint at something else. A cavity. Perhaps an old passage, deliberately weakened. Mr. Croft was not killed by a landslide. He was assassinated by one. A chill, colder than the quarry air, passed through me. The silent white cliffs no longer seemed merely imposing. They felt watchful, secretive. The sharp sound of Holmes clapping the dust from his hands broke the spell, his expression now set and purposeful. The earth cannot speak, but the men who work it can. Our next task is to hear the whispers carried on this white dust. We must speak with the quarryman, Sherlock Holmes noted. The air in the quarry was alive, thick with fine, ghostly powder. It coated our hats and shoulders within minutes, clung to the back of our throats, and created a pale haze. Through this, the sun struggled to penetrate. A rhythmic clang of iron on stone provided a percussive beat, punctuated by grunts of labouring men, and the distant, grinding sigh of some new steam-powered contraption. It is a world unto itself, Watson, a microcosm of industry where every surface tells a story. Let us see what tales these men have to tell, explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes strode towards a crude wooden shelter, where a half-dozen men were taking their midday repast. The crunch of our boots on the chalky ground announced our approach. They looked up, their faces streaked with sweat and white dust, regarding us with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. An older man, with a face as cragged as the quarry walls themselves, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Lost your way, gentlemen? Not much for tourists to see here, except chalk, responded quarry worker. Holmes spoke, his voice mild, almost conversational. We are here regarding the unfortunate end of Mr. Croft. I am a consulting geologist, assisting the constabulary, observed Sherlock Holmes. The lie was delivered so smoothly that I almost believed it myself. The men exchanged glances. One of them, a younger fellow with resentment etched into his features, spat a wad of tobacco onto the white ground. The younger man grumbled the words more than spoke them. Unfortunate for him. Pushed us too hard, he did. Always going on about the new ways, new machines. No respect for a man's skill, remarked disgruntled worker. The old worker shot him a warning look, before turning back to us. His tone was weary, as if he had seen it all before. Pay young Finn no mind, sir. Croft was a fair man, just particular. He knew this quarry better than anyone, even the old tales. Said the fissures we saw yesterday were just that, fissures. Not the old smugglers' runs the village folk whisper about, quarry worker replied. Holmes's interest was piqued, though his expression remained placid. Smugglers' runs? A local fancy, I take it? Remarked Sherlock Holmes. The old worker gave a short, humourless laugh. Aye. Stories of passages through the downs, from when brandy was worth more than chalk. Nonsense. The chalk's too soft. It all have collapsed a century ago, answered quarry worker. Another worker chimed in, eager to contribute. If you want strange, ask about that German fellow. Herr Weber. Always here with the owner, Mr. Marsh. Looking at the cliffs he was, but never seemed to care about the product. Gave Croft the shivers, he did, remarked quarry worker. Holmes filed this information away with a slight nod, then turned his full attention to the resentful young man, Finn. His next question cut through the low chatter like a shard of flint. "You argued with Mr. Croft the morning of his death, did you not, Mr. Finn?" "A matter of a docked wage for mishandling the new steam winch," deduced Sherlock Holmes. The man, Finn, visibly paled beneath his layer of grime. He jumped to his feet, the bench scraping harshly against the ground. Finn's voice rose, sharp with panic. "I had words with him. So did half the men here." "That don't mean I sent the cliff down on him," replied disgruntled worker. We took our leave shortly thereafter, the sound of Finn's angry protestations following us. Once we were out of earshot, I turned to my companion. "That man, Holmes, he has a temper and a clear motive. Surely the police should be told." "Dr. John Watson replied." Holmes replied calmly, without breaking his stride. "A most convenient suspect, which is precisely why he is not our man. Did you not observe his hands, Watson? They were stained with black grease from the winch he so despises. The body was found in the western pit, covered in pure white chalk dust. Finn was nowhere near the incident. His anger is a distraction, a piece of theatrical scenery," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I marvelled, as I so often did, at his ability to cut through the fog of human emotion to the cold, hard fact. The quarry behind us seemed to fall silent, its secrets still buried deep within the chalk. Holmes's voice was firm, his mind already on the next step. "No, Watson. The truth of this affair is not to be found in the gossip of disgruntled labourers. It lies with the meticulous foreman himself. We must gain access to his lodgings, to his papers. I have a distinct feeling that Mr. Croft's most important work was not done in this quarry, but on the pages of his private ledger," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I confess I was taken aback. We had identified a man with motive enough to fell a dozen foremen, yet Holmes dismissed him with a wave of his hand as we departed the quarry. His interest, as ever, lay not with the petty grievances of a disgruntled labourer, but with the grander architecture of the crime. Our next port of call was the constabulary in Lewes, a grim grey building where the air hung thick with the scent of damp wool and carbolic soap. "We are here to see Dr. Reed," explained Sherlock Holmes. Such was the authority in Holmes's tone, that the desk sergeant, a stout man with a face like a weathered pudding, simply grunted and gestured us down a poorly lit corridor. The floorboards groaned under our feet. Dr. Alistair Reed, the police surgeon, looked up as we entered his cluttered office. His weariness was palpable, etched into the lines of his face as he pushed aside a stack of papers with a sigh that spoke of long, grim duties. "Mr. Holmes, I presume? I was informed of your impending visit. Here are the personal effects of the deceased, Mr. Croft," answered Dr. Alistair Reed. He slid a plain wooden box across his desk, the sound scraping loudly in the quiet room. Inside lay the sad effects of the deceased: a silver watch, a few shillings in a leather pouch, and a briar pipe. I felt a familiar pang of melancholy. With practised efficiency, Holmes examined each item. His interest peaked only when his long fingers encountered a small, cloth-bound ledger. It was its condition that arrested his attention. The book was coated in a fine, uniform layer of white chalk dust, so pervasive it seemed deliberately applied. He held it up to the weak gaslight, and I saw that familiar, intense gleam in his eyes, the look of a hunter who has just caught the scent of his prey. Curious, is it not, Watson? A man so meticulous, they say, yet his private accounts are so carelessly soiled. Or is it carelessness? Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Without another word to Dr. Reed, Holmes took the ledger, and we returned to our rooms at the inn. He immediately transformed our sitting room into a makeshift laboratory. The sharp, acrid tang of chemical reagents soon filled the air, a smell I associated with the turning point of a case. He laid the book on an oilcloth, uncorked a vial, and with a surgeon's delicacy, began to dab the chalk-stained pages. I watched, fascinated, as the reagent wicked away the chalk. Beneath, faint, spidery script emerged in a different ink, For nearly an hour, Holmes worked in silence, the only sounds in the room being the gentle clink of glass vials and the soft rustle of turning pages. Finally he leaned back with a soft sigh of satisfaction, the sound of his chair scraping faintly on the floorboards. A thin smile of triumph touched his lips as he pushed the open ledger towards me. "The chalk was no accident, Watson. It was a crude but effective attempt at concealment. Croft was not a party to this affair. He was investigating it. He was using the very dust of his trade to hide his notes from prying eyes," Sherlock Holmes said. "Good heavens, Holmes, what has he found?" Dr. John Watson replied. "A second inventory. His own. See here? Dates that correspond with Herr Weber's visits, quantities of special consignments, and these initials, KW for Klaus Weber, I presume. And here, Opta, GLs. Optical glass, Watson. High-quality German lenses, smuggled into this country under the guise of chalk shipments. Croft was a brave man, attempting to quantify the very crime that would ultimately claim his life," explained Sherlock Holmes. My friend stood abruptly and began to pace before the hearth. I could hear the restless energy in his sharp, rhythmic footsteps on the floorboards, like a coiled spring about to be released. "They are not smuggling contraband out, Watson, but in. And there is only one way to move such quantities from a quarry without raising suspicion. The ledger gives us the what, but not the how. For that we must turn to the arteries of this modern industrial age," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He stopped his pacing suddenly and turned to face me. In the firelight his grey eyes seemed to burn with purpose as he spoke, his voice low and determined. "Tomorrow we investigate the railway," observed Sherlock Holmes. Following the thread of logic spun from the late Mr. Croft's ledger, Holmes led me the next morning not to the quarry pit, but to the network of railway lines that served it. The siding was a stark study in monochrome. The iron rails and soot-stained sleepers were dusted with a ghostly film of chalk, as if a premature frost had settled upon this grimy corner of Sussex. The air, thick with the scent of coal and hot metal, carried the intermittent clang of a hammer on steel from a distant workshop. "Observe, Watson. The main line is used for the transport of the raw chalk, but this particular spur leading to that isolated goods shed tells a different story," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He pointed with his cane to a set of rails that branched off towards a dilapidated wooden structure. He knelt, disregarding the grime, and ran a gloved finger along the inside of the track. The metallic scrape of his boot on the gravel was the only sound that broke the silence. "The scoring here is deeper than elsewhere. And see the residue? Not the coarse grit of the quarry, but a finer, more uniform powder. Something far heavier than simple chalk, and loaded with immense care, has passed this way with great frequency." "Heavier? Good heavens, Holmes, what else would they transport from a chalk quarry with such care?" Dr. John Watson said. Before Holmes could answer, a sudden heavy tread crunched upon the ballast behind us. We turned to face a thick-set man in greasy overalls, his face a mask of suspicion. "This is railway property. State your business, or I'll have you thrown off it," railway foreman replied. His voice was a low growl, matching the belligerence in his eyes. Holmes rose slowly to his full height, his expression one of mild academic interest. "A fascinating system you have here. We are merely admiring the efficiency of your goods transport. Tell me, do you handle many specialized cargoes?" Sherlock Holmes noted. As the foreman sputtered, unable to formulate a suitable retort, another figure emerged from the shadows of the goods shed. It was, to my considerable surprise, Herr Klaus Weber. He approached with a smooth, unhurried gait, a stark contrast to the foreman's brutish stance. "Gentlemen, I see your curiosity extends beyond the quarry itself." "A comprehensive interest," responded Herr Klaus Weber. His English was precise, yet an undercurrent of something cold and foreign lingered in its cadence. Holmes met his gaze directly, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Indeed, Herr Weber, I was just remarking upon the dust's fineness. It reminds me of the type used for polishing high-quality glass. Precision lenses, for instance, required for advanced optical instruments. Telescopes, rangefinders. I believe these are of considerable military interest in your homeland," stated Sherlock Holmes. The effect of Holmes's words was immediate and profound. The affable mask fell from Weber's face, replaced by a look of pure menace. His voice, when he spoke, had lost all its smoothness. It was now as sharp and brittle as ice. "You are a meddlesome man, Mr. Holmes. Such interests can be hazardous to one's health," Herr Klaus Weber said. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the foreman. A silent order passed between them. Holmes's grip on my arm tightened, a silent, urgent warning. "Come, Watson. I believe we have seen all we need to for now," remarked Sherlock Holmes. As we turned, a new sound emerged. A low groan of straining metal, easily lost in the yard's general din. Swiftly it grew into a menacing rumble. The rhythmic clatter of iron wheels upon iron rails filled the air. I glanced back in horror to see a line of heavy goods wagons, which I had presumed safely chocked on the incline, now rolling freely down the very track we stood upon. There was no time to think. With a strength I had not imagined he possessed, Holmes hurled me sideways. We tumbled down the gravel embankment, landing in a heap amongst the weeds and nettles. A moment later, the air was split by a deafening roar as the wagons thundered past, their immense weight shaking the very ground beneath us. They crashed into the buffers at the end of the line, with a final, deafening shriek of tortured metal. I pushed myself up, my heart hammering against my ribs, my ears ringing from the impact. Through the settling dust I saw them. Weber and the foreman stood watching us, their forms little more than dark silhouettes against the pale sky. Without a word they turned and vanished into the gloom of the shed. "They have shown their hand, Watson," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Holmes's voice was low and hard, stripped of all its earlier academic detachment. He brushed the dust from his coat, his grey eyes as flinty and cold as the rails themselves. "This is no longer merely a case of smuggling. It is a matter of espionage, and they will not hesitate to kill to protect their secrets. We must return to our lodgings at once." The near disaster upon the railway siding had left me shaken. That Holmes, upon our return to the relative sanctuary of our Sussex cottage, seemed only to have been invigorated by the peril. The scent of soot still clung to his tweed jacket, which he now inspected with detached curiosity before the hearth. Outside, the wind howled across the downs, driving sheets of rain against the window panes with a sound like thrown gravel. But within, the only sounds were the steady hiss and pop of the logs, and the thoughtful tapping of Holmes's long fingers against the mantelpiece. "The attempt was clumsy, Watson, but informative. It tells us our quarry is not only dangerous, but growing desperate," observed Sherlock Holmes. Before I could reply, a sudden, authoritative rap upon the front door cut through the howl of the wind with the finality of a judge's gavel. It was not the knock of a neighbour, but a summons, sharp and impatient. Holmes's head snapped up, his eyes instantly alert. He gave a slight nod, and I moved to answer it. On the threshold stood a man of medium height, impeccably dressed in a dark city suit that seemed entirely out of place in our rural retreat. A gust of damp, cold air swirled into the room, carrying the scent of wet wool. Rain beaded on the brim of his bowler hat, and his face, pale and clean-shaven, was a mask of stern composure. His gaze swept past me, sharp and assessing, before fixing upon Holmes. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Alistair Reed, at your service. I come bearing a message from our mutual friend in Whitehall." "Might I trouble you for a moment of your time?" said Dr. Alistair Reed. His voice was clipped and formal, yet I detected a faint undercurrent of urgency, the carefully controlled tension of a man bearing a heavy burden. Holmes gestured him inside with a sweep of his hand. "By all means, Doctor. I have been expecting my brother to take an interest." His tendrils, as you know, have a way of reaching even the quiet corners of Sussex when matters of state are concerned. "Pray, come to the fire," replied Sherlock Holmes. Reed entered, his movements as crisp as his attire. With military precision, he deposited his hat and a slim leather portfolio on the hall table. The curt nod he offered in lieu of pleasantries spoke volumes of the urgency at hand. "Mycroft's concerns are gravely well-founded, Mr. Holmes. The incident involving the foreman, Croft, is confirmed to be connected to matters of national security. We have active intelligence suggesting this quarry is the central hub of an espionage ring smuggling military-grade optical components to the German Empire." Dr. Alistair Reed said. Holmes leaned forward. His earlier languor utterly vanished, replaced by a hawk-like intensity. He steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed upon the man from Whitehall. "Lenses, of the quality Herr Weber discussed. It explains the meticulous, chalk-stained ledger," stated Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes! The chalk itself? But how could it serve as anything more than a simple blind?" asked Dr. John Watson. "It is the most ingenious camouflage, Watson. The very product of the quarry, the chalk, provides the perfect cover. What better way to hide illicit goods than within shipments of something so mundane and voluminous? The weight, the dust. Any inspection would be cursory at best." Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Dr. Reed gave a curt nod, a flicker of grim satisfaction in his eyes. He opened his portfolio, the crisp snap of its leather clasps sharp in the quiet room, followed by the rustle of official documents. "Your deductions are, as ever, swift, Mr. Holmes. Our intelligence confirms the principle. The contraband is concealed within barrels of quarried chalk. More importantly, our sources point unequivocally to one man as the operation's mastermind. The quarry owner, Mr. Gideon Marsh," responded Dr. Alistair Reed. He laid a photograph upon the table. It showed a stout, formidable-looking man with a prosperous air and cold, calculating eyes. The pillar of the community. Marsh is well insulated by his public reputation and a network of fiercely loyal men. Conventional surveillance has proven insufficient. We require undeniable proof, Mr. Holmes, and we require it with utmost urgency. The potential damage to national security is escalating. Mycroft has authorized you to act with full discretion on behalf of the Crown." Holmes picked up the photograph, studying the face of Gideon Marsh. A slow, thin smile touched his lips, a sign I knew well. It was the smile of a hunter who has finally sighted his prey. The game, as he would say, was afoot. "Excellent. The time for observation is over. The time for action is at hand. Watson, your service revolver will be necessary. Dr. Reed, inform your department to be prepared. Tomorrow morning we shall pay a visit to Mr. Marsh, and test the foundations of his respectable enterprise," replied Sherlock Holmes. "The intelligence from my brother's agent struck like lightning, propelling us into action. With the fury of a gathering storm, the next morning found us ascending the path to the main office of the Sussex chalk quarry, a formidable party. Holmes and I were joined by the stout Dr. Reed, and two quiet men from Whitehall whose presence lent a grim finality to our purpose. The very air, thick with fine white dust, seemed to deaden the sound of our approach. Gideon Marsh's office was an island of mahogany and polished brass in a sea of chalk. Behind a vast desk, a leather chair resembled a throne. Through the window, the quarry's ceaseless industry was a silent film. The only sound in the room was the solemn tick of an ornate mantel clock. Marsh himself, a man who filled his grand chair, rose with a manufactured smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Mr. Holmes, and Dr. Watson. An honor. But I must confess this is a most unexpected assembly." "To what do I owe the pleasure?" replied Mr. Gideon Marsh. His voice was a deep, confident baritone, accustomed to command. Holmes did not return the smile. His tall, spare figure, a stark contrast to the quarry owner's bulk. "There is no pleasure in it, Mr. Marsh, I assure you. We are here to discuss matters of national security, specifically the regular shipment of high-refraction optical lenses to the German Empire, concealed within your quarried chalk," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The ticking of the clock suddenly seemed to grow louder in the ensuing silence. The colour drained from Marsh's face, leaving behind a blotchy, mottled pallor. His jovial facade did not so much crumble as shatter. "This is an outrage. An accusation of the wildest sort. My business is chalk, sir, not treason," replied Mr. Gideon Marsh. "And yet your associate, Herr Klaus Weber, has a documented history with the Zeiss works in Jena, a peculiar partner for a simple quarryman. We also have a manifest, Mr. Marsh, detailing a consignment of specialized cutting tools that arrived from Hamburg 3 months ago. Tools entirely unsuitable for quarrying chalk, but perfectly suited for hollowing it out with precision," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Holmes's words were surgical. Marsh slumped back in his chair, his breathing labored. His eyes darted between Holmes and the silent agents by the door, his mind racing. Then, a strange transformation occurred. Fear gave way to a sneering, venomous arrogance. "You have nothing but air and fancy, Mr. Holmes. Whatever you think you know, whatever you hope to unearth, lies deeper than the oldest bones in this quarry's belly. Do you truly believe you can unravel an operation of this scale? You and your Whitehall functionaries, chasing the superstitious tales of this place, the smugglers' caves. They are just that, Mr. Holmes. Stories to frighten children," replied Mr. Gideon Marsh. He laughed, a harsh and grating sound. But I was not watching him. I was watching Holmes. At the mention of superstitious tales and smugglers' caves, my friend's posture had changed. A flicker of intense concentration, of profound understanding, lit his grey eyes. He had been given the very thing he came for. It was not a confession, but a key. "Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Your candour has been most illuminating," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply, with a shocking abruptness. Holmes turned on his heel. He gave a curt nod to Mycroft's men. "Gentlemen, our business in this office is concluded. The quarry itself, however, now demands our immediate attention. Come, Watson Reed." Mr. Marsh has inadvertently reminded us that the oldest tales often contain the most modern truths. He strode from the room, leaving Gideon Marsh gaping in a mixture of fury and dread. We followed Holmes out into the dusty air. His long strides carried him with renewed purpose, not towards the main pit, but towards the ancient cliffs bordering the quarry, the very place local legend ascribed to the smugglers of old. Acting on Marsh's inadvertent confession, Holmes led us along the base of the towering chalk cliffs. He stopped before a section of rock indistinguishable to my eye from any other. As I glanced at the sceptical faces of Mycroft's agents and the local inspector, Holmes tapped the chalk with his knuckles, the dull thuds echoing in the cold air. "The old fool's tales, Inspector," Holmes explained without turning. Marsh dismissed them, and in doing so confirmed them. Every local legend contains a grain of truth, and the one about the Hollow Men's Walk was too specific to ignore. It spoke not of a path over the cliffs, but through them, observed Sherlock Holmes. He pressed a particular knob of flint embedded in the chalk. For a moment, I thought his theory had failed. Then, with a low, grinding groan that vibrated through my boots, a section of the cliff face receded inwards, revealing a yawning blackness. A gust of cool, damp air washed over us, carrying the scent of machine oil and cold stone. We entered, our lanterns piercing the oppressive darkness. Before us stretched a cavern of immense size, dwarfing any natural grotto. It was, to our astonishment, a fully equipped workshop. Benches along the walls held modern cutting and boring implements, but the chamber was dominated by a dozen enormous, perfectly cubed blocks of chalk. A fine white powder hung in the air, coating every surface. Observe, gentlemen, not merely quarried, but finished with a machinist's precision. Why would Marsh expend such labor to shape these blocks only to store them in a hidden cave? observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes ran a gloved finger along a hairline seam invisible to my own eyes. He nodded to one of the agents, who produced a crowbar and wedged its tip into the seam. With a harsh scrape of metal and a sickening crack, a slab of chalk fell away from the block's face. My God! The block was hollow. Nestled within a bed of wood shavings lay a magnificent lens of curved glass, nearly 2 feet in diameter. It was a thing of terrible beauty, and, I surmised, of obvious military application. Good heavens, Holmes, these are high-aperture telescopic lenses. The precision is extraordinary, undoubtedly German, said Dr. Alistair Reed. Indeed, Holmes confirmed, his voice low and intense. Smuggled not in crates to be discovered, but as the chalk itself. An operation of breathtaking genius. And now, I believe it is time to greet our industrious hosts, stated Sherlock Holmes. As if on cue, voices and footfalls echoed from a deeper passage. At a gesture from Holmes we melted into the shadows. The voices of Gideon Marsh and Herr Weber grew louder as they emerged into the lantern light, their faces ruddy with success. They stopped dead, and I watched Marsh's complexion turn the colour of his own chalk. Holmes, by what right do you trespass here? This is private property. I'll have you all arrested for this outrage, responded Mr. Gideon Marsh. His voice was loud, but I, as a medical man, could detect the tremor of sheer panic beneath the bluster. Your privacy, Mr. Marsh, was forfeit when you murdered Silas Croft, Holmes stated, his voice cutting through the tension. He was a meticulous man. He would have soon noticed that certain quarried blocks weighed a fraction of what they should. For his diligence, you sent him to his death, replied Sherlock Holmes. At this, Herr Weber took a sharp step backwards, his hand darting inside his coat. Before he could produce a weapon, however, he was immediately seized by 2 of Mycroft's men. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs being secured was the only sound for a long moment. You have no proof, answered Herr Klaus Weber. Weber snarled, his accent thickening with anger. This cave is my proof, Holmes declared, gesturing to the hollowed block. These lenses are my proof. Your government's ambition to equip its navy with superior optics is well known to my brother. You provided the contraband, and Mr. Marsh provided the means of its transport. This quarry was a front for espionage, a trap which has now, I am pleased to say, sprung shut upon you, deduced Sherlock Holmes. The inspector stepped forward to formally caution the prisoners. As they were led away, their faces grim masks in the lantern light, a profound silence descended upon the cavern. The dust was beginning to settle, both literally and figuratively, on the case of the chalk-stained ledger. The wind had scoured the Sussex skies to a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the events of the past week seemed as distant as the faint smudge of smoke from a steamer on the horizon. A profound quiet had settled over our little cottage, broken only by the gentle crackle of the hearth-fire and the rhythmic ticking of the mantelpiece clock. Holmes sat deeply ensconced in his armchair, the thin blue smoke from his clay pipe curling towards the ceiling in a lazy spiral. Before the fire, listening with rapt attention, sat our landlady, Mrs. Hudson, and our visitor, Dr. Alistair Reed, the local physician whose initial examination of the unfortunate Croft had proven so useful. It is the sheer scale of it all that I find so confounding, Mr. Holmes. Espionage, military-grade optics, hidden in our quiet chalk pits. It beggars belief, replied Dr. Alistair Reed. Dr. Reed shook his head, his voice a low rumble of astonishment. Holmes removed the pipe from his lips, his eyes gleaming with that familiar analytical light. It is precisely the quietude of the place that made it the perfect theatre for their operation, Doctor. Who would suspect an international conspiracy concealed beneath our provincial chalk pits? The trick, as ever, was to see what others overlooked, Sherlock Holmes noted. And that was the ledger, was it not, sir? The one you spent so long examining with your glass, answered Martha Hudson. Mrs. Hudson spoke with a quiet pride, her knitting needle stilled in her lap. "Indeed, Mrs. Hudson. The key was the dust on the ledger. It was contaminated with a specific sand, not from Sussex, but from the German lens factory. Marsh inspected the smuggled goods, and in his greed, carried that sand back on his person, leaving the incriminating trace on the very book he used to cover his tracks," explained Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting the simplicity of the final deduction settle in the room. A log shifted in the grate, sending a brief shower of sparks up the chimney. Dr. Reed leaned forward, his expression one of pure admiration. "Astonishing. A case for the ages," responded Dr. Alistair Reed. "Perhaps. But it marks a change, gentlemen. And you, Mrs. Hudson, the game evolves. In London, my adversaries were so often driven by passion, by personal revenge or singular avarice, a stolen jewel, a disputed inheritance. The crimes were intimate, their geography confined to the labyrinth of a single city," observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes rose and strode to the window. His tall figure stood stark against the rolling green of the downs, as a salt-laden breeze, rich with wild thyme, billowed the curtains. Now, the telegraph and the steam engine have woven the world into a single web. Crime has become impersonal, international, industrial. Mr. Marsh was not a mere murderer, but a component in a machine stretching from Sussex to Berlin. The modern criminal is a managing director, his weapon a balance sheet," Sherlock Holmes said. His voice had lost its sharp, decisive edge, replaced by a more contemplative, almost melancholic tone. He seemed to be speaking as much to himself as to us. "And the detective, Holmes?" wondered Dr. John Watson. "The detective, my dear Watson, must now be a student of geology, chemistry, and global commerce. The footprint in the mud is replaced by the impurity in the mineral. The challenge is greater, the stakes higher. This quiet life, it seems, is not an escape from the world, but merely a new vantage point from which to observe its endless, fascinating villainy." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He fell silent then, gazing out towards the English Channel, that great moat which no longer felt quite so impregnable. His words hung in the air, a pronouncement not of victory, but of a new and unending vigilance required for the century to come.